President Cyril Ramaphosa is on a four-nation visit to West Africa. He's starting with bilateral talks with his Nigerian counterpart, Muhammadu Buhari, before heading to the Ivory Coast, Senegal and Ghana. So the purpose of this visit is to foster closer political, economic and trade links between South Africa and the region and to breathe life into the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Let's unpack what this visit means for our country and for the continent. Author and Africa Analyst Victor Kgomoeswana and corporate and international trade lawyer Ronny Mkhwanazi are my two guests to give us a sense of why this visit is so important. And Victor, I want to kick off our discussion with you this morning as an Africa analyst in light of what we've seen, perhaps more recently insofar as the closing of international borders is concerned with the discovery of the Omicron variant, the closing of our borders to South Africa, in the UK in particular. Why is it ever more important in light of such developments that Africa comes together?
Morning, Michelle. It is important because of two reasons, and I'll make it quick. First of all, we have just signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That Africa Continental Free Trade Area is not going to come into effect unless heads of state, people with authority like President Ramaphosa, President Buhari, President Nana Akufo-Addo, and everyone on this four-country trip will come together and give instructions. I heard President Ramaphosa last week saying we have asked our ministers to remove barriers. They should not ask. They should tell them and hold them accountable that you have to open and remove all those barriers that make it difficult for us to trade with one another. Africa is 1 billion plus people, so we can be self-sufficient economically, Michelle, by doing trade with one another if we open these Afrophobic borders that we have created, especially for trade. The second reason, and you can check this with Stats SA, regional and domestic tourism, Michelle, can actually deliver more returns and better returns than tourism from Europe and the US. Just check the stats. I think it's called Migration and Tourism or something like a report that they did where they measured from 2009 or so to 2020 where the bulk of the travelers to South Africa were coming from. They were not coming from Europe or the Americas. They were coming from the African continent. Countries like Zimbabwe, countries like Nigeria offering us the opportunity. Now, if we can get those two things right, just opening the barriers, removing the barriers to trade, and encouraging regional and domestic tourism, we could recover because we already know that we are on our own. You just had the story now, you led with it, that the Omicron variant was already there in Europe, which means, number one, the Europeans didn't tell us about the variant. They knew they had. But secondly, they can shut you down just like that. So unless you can rely on yourself, you are going to be at the mercy of people who actually or evidently don't make you a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And very, very quickly, that decision was made to close borders to South Africans. Ronny Mkhwanazi, I want to bring you into the discussion because we've been talking about this issue around removing barriers for trade. Time and time again, this discussion comes up. Where are we at now?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Look, the AFCFTA is basically a bouquet of agreements that are yet to be finalized, notwithstanding the fact that the actual, trade agreement is finalized. So, just in terms of taking stock, the agreement itself has to be underpinned by a number of protocols which will deal with specific, elements of trade. So, for example, there's supposed to be a protocol on trade in goods. That protocol has been finalized. There's also a protocol on trade in services that has also been finalized in the AFCFTA. Then there's a protocol on rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes, and that has also been finalized. But what is still outstanding is the protocol on competition policy, which is usually a hot issue between countries during trade negotiations. And then, of course, the protocol on intellectual property. But I think above all, the most important thing is that if you're going to remove, tariffs, for example, on the continent, the first thing you need to agree on are the rules of origin in terms of, the passport of where the goods come from. What percentage of, beneficiation of a product would be considered for a product to qualify under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement? And that agreement is still outstanding, the rules of origin one. The African countries have, up to this point, hinted that they would like a 86% African beneficiation, and that is neither here nor there, as it were. So as it is now, the agreement is in place. However, all the, enabling, I would say, instruments that need to give, effect to the agreement are still far from complete. And until that happens, I think, as Mr. Kgomoeswana said, the presidents may go around and talk and talk and talk, but we need to make sure that we fix the nuts and bolts in order for us to be to enable the agreement to come to life.
So you reckon this is sort of a nice-to-have visit, just to sort of smooth things over, but as you say, the nuts and bolts discussions are still pending, Ronny?
They're really pending. I wouldn't say it's a nice to have, because remember that a part of implementation is momentum, and I think that these type of visits that the president is undertaking at the moment, for example, the Kenyan president, as you know as well, last week was in South Africa and also hopefully signed some deals. So yes, I would say for purposes of keeping the spirit and the momentum of the agreement, the visits are important, but unless we sort out the nuts and bolts, they will remain talk shops, which is sadly what they are at the moment.
Yeah. I want to talk more about multilateralism with you, Victor, because we often talk about this as something that we're striving towards. Have you seen, specifically in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, that any kind of multilateralism that does involve our country and the African continent is not on our terms here on the continent?
Apart from, and thanks, good morning to Ronny as well, apart from the COVAX initiative, I forget what we call it here, apart from that initiative, which I also don't think delivered maximum benefit, because I would have loved to see Africans manufacturing their own PPE and insisting that all protective and personal equipment that we used during COVID should be manufactured in Africa. We have capacity to manufacture these things, but somehow we seem to be happy to import. And the point Ronny is making about rules of origin is important. You see, multilateralism takes the 55 African states and says, oh, you should work together. But multilateralism starts with bilateralism. And if you have bilateralism, which means the relationship between two countries, in this case, two largest economies or the top three economies of Africa, in Nigeria and South Africa, if those start leading the way by breaking the barriers between the two of them, then the rest of the smaller economies will follow. We will have the whole of ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, where Nigeria is following the lead of Nigeria. Now, if he can get Nigeria to remove the key barriers, and he can go to Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, which are neighbors themselves and are also neighbors of Nigeria, and get them to share with him how they managed to get the cocoa agreement, which helped the farmers of cocoa, which goes into making chocolate, how they managed to get that in 2019 against the tide of international opposition. Those are the decisions that can lead. But I agree with you, multilateralism is the future. We haven't done enough of it. We have talked about it, but we haven't done enough when it comes to opening borders. But he is visiting the right economies right there in Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, because they are major economies and they are doing, at least Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, doing business with one another to be the formidable chocolate factory of West Africa that they can be.
Ronny, very, very quickly, before I let you go, the banding together of the African continent could mean such a powerhouse in the world economy, couldn't it? I mean, is there a lot of ideological difference that stops us from being potentially a superpower as a continent?
I mean, besides the fact that, of course, you've got multiple, ethnicities and also, historical, colonializations. For example, the Francophone countries vis-a-vis, the common law countries. I don't think that philosophically and economically we are, far apart from each other. And I think that's why we were able to agree and put the AFCFTA into place. But I think, as I've said, that the political will is required. We need, as Victor mentioned there, the heads of states and the governments on the continent to really rally behind this. Because you must also remember that we're also facing historical challenges in terms of, Victor spoke about bilateralism. If you just look at our continent in terms of the regionalism that we have, ECOWAS, SADC, and all those other, institutions we have. And whilst we, immediately after we signed the AFCFTA, you also saw Kenya, going into a bilateral with the United States outside of the AFCFTA and so forth. So I think it's really a question of horses for courses and knowing exactly that it's important that we tie up the nuts and bolts. The issue of harmonization of laws, once again, a very critical one, because if you do not harmonize the laws on the continent, it's going to be impossible to move. And then, of course, I always give the example of the automotive industry, which is quite, different in South Africa or SADC rather compared to the rest of the world. So we're not far apart. I think we're actually very closer than we think. We just need to keep our shoulder to the wheel and make sure that we put in the right tools in place to make sure the agreement comes to life.
Let me thank both of our guests for your time this morning. Ronny Mkhwanazi is a corporate and international trade lawyer. Victor Kgomoeswana is author and Africa analyst. Thanks very much to you both.